Terry, could you start by reviewing the committee members that are on the line?
Yes, you, Kevin O'Malley, Jeff Shelkey, Eugene Williams, and John Yonan. Are there any other committee members on? I did not see.
This is Jeff Schreiber from the city as well.
Thank you, Jeff. Is Luis on the line for
Yes.
Dan this morning? Thank
Yes,
you,
I'm
Luis. And is Mark on the line for Heather? And Chad? And Mayor Rockingham is not going to be on the call. So that's who's at the meeting.
Was John Donovan here? Did I miss that?
No, he's not on the line yet.
Okay.
I just got on the line.
Oh, thank you,
Hello,
John.
Good morning.
Like just rubbing a lamp. All right. Terry, do you want to walk through who's attending the meeting in the audience?
Okay, there are a lot of people in the audience. So I'll just start at the top. Mary, Craig, Dan Thomas, Dan Nicobine, Elliot, Emily, Eve De Laurentiis, Grant, Jackie Forbes, Jeff Schoenberg, Jeffrey Glover, John, who I don't know his last name, Noah Jones, Kelly Passy, Kendra Johnson, Lenny Kanata, Leroy, Leslie, Mike Clemens, Russell, Ryan Peterson, Ryan Thompson, perhaps, Simone, okay, Tomto, Simone, Stephanie, Tom Murtha, and Todd Smith.
Okay, doke. Let's move on to agenda changes and announcements. I just want to give you a couple of reminders. So today's meeting is or will be recorded. The recording is going to be posted to CMAP's YouTube channel. Just in terms of meeting etiquette, remote meeting etiquette, we ask that everybody stay muted unless you're speaking. There's excessive background noise. We'll just place everyone on mute until we can figure it out. When you are making or seconding a motion, please state your name. Also, due to changes to the Open Meetings Act that happened in the last legislative session, all votes need to be conducted as roll call votes. That includes things like approving the minutes. Members of the audience, if you want to talk during discussion of the agenda items or during public comment, let us know that via the chat box and wait for a member of CMAP staff to announce it. I'll also give you an opportunity or give an opportunity for anyone on the phone to comment. For other questions, please do use the chat box. Staff is monitoring that. So I'm going to move on to agenda item 3, which is approval of the minutes. I hope you've all had a chance to take a look at the minutes as presented. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting?
Eugene Williams, I'll make that motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
This is Kevin O'Malley, I'll second it.
Okay. All right, then I'm going to call your names. Luis for CDOT.
Yes.
Yes.
Kevin O'Malley.
Yes.
Jeff Schreiber.
Yes.
Mayor Rockingham's not present. Mayor Schilke.
Yes.
Mayor Williams.
Yes.
And then for myself, I vote yes. The motion carries. All right, well, let's move on to the meat of this agenda. Continuing on with evaluating the lessons learned from the inaugural STP Shared Fund program is CAMA. And we're really going to be focusing today on transportation impact scoring for bridge projects and for truck route improvements, and then talk about some other ancillary stuff related to freight. So this is the freight planning factor, and then discuss proposed changes to the overall weighting of the project factor, of the planning factors for all project types. I do want to note that there was a revised slide deck that was posted yesterday. So if you downloaded a copy at an earlier date, you may want to go back and grab the updated version from the committee meeting materials webpage. That's actually what Cam is going to be going through now. So I'll turn it over to Cam.
Great, thank you, Jesse. I think Jesse pretty much covered this introductory slide on what we'll be talking about, so I'm going to jump right in, starting first with the bridge rehab and reconstruction projects. Current methodology uses the National Bridge Inventory, the NBI, sufficiency rating to define need by subtracting that rating from 100, which is the maximum rating for a bridge. The improvement score also uses a sufficiency rating adjusted based on IDOT's major bridge program factors for project scope and the functional class of the road. Also, as a reminder, most of these bridge projects involve multiple individual structures. So based on the sufficiency rating, CMAP staff first identifies what is considered to be the most critical structure in the group for the project and uses only that structure for scoring both the need and the improvement for the overall project. So since the first call for projects, we've heard from stakeholders that the adjustment factors could disadvantage constrained urban bridges because they're based on standards that are unachievable in those dense urban environments, and that the full scope of project improvements may not be captured when we look just at the overall sufficiency rating of these bridge projects. So based on these comments, staff proposes no changes to the existing condition scoring, since sufficiency rating provides a good overall assessment of the condition score for the structures. However, we are proposing changes to the improvement score methodology, shifting away from the IDOT adjustment factors to dig deeper into the individual elements of the structures to score based on the potential impact of the project on the deck, the superstructure, and substructure ratings, the degree of load limits posted on the structure, and also additional points would be given if the project corrects insufficient lane widths or improves structure-specific safety features like railings, transitions, and guardrails. So the total improvement score would be the sum of these individual element scores. When determining how much improvement is likely due to the project, we're making the following assumptions. The full replacement of either the entire structure or one component of the structure would result in the achievement of a maximum condition rating for the replaced element. A partial replacement or rehabilitation of a component would result in achievement of a satisfactory rating for the component, and that other repairs to a component that's not being replaced or rehabbed would result in a one category improvement in the component's rating. Also, we're assuming that our historic and or movable bridges can face significant hurdles to full replacement. So with these assumptions in mind, the scoring for the structural elements would look like this. And the scoring criteria are shown there kind of on the right-hand side of the slide. So that's the NBI scorings all the way from 0 for failed up to 9 for excellent. So full replacement of any element, whether that's the deck or the superstructure or the substructure, would be scored receiving points equal to 9, that highest rating, minus the current rating for that element. Partial replacement or rehab would receive points equal to 6, which is the value of a satisfactory rating, minus the current rating for the element. Elements not being replaced or rehabbed that were being repaired in some manner, such as joint sealing, for example, would receive 1 improvement point for that particular element. Because it may not be feasible, and this is a slide that was added that Jesse just mentioned the changes to the slide deck, so that's right here. Because it may not be feasible to fully replace a historic or movable structure, due in part just to SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office requirements. As a result, these structures likely can't achieve a condition rating of 9, so staff is proposing applying a multiplier of 1.5 to the improvement score for each element that is being rehabbed or partially replaced. Qualifying structures in this case would be those that are on or eligible to be on the National Register, or those that are designated as a movable structure type. For structures that are coded in the NBI as maybe eligible or unknown, staff would consult with the state bridge database and or seek additional information from sponsors to make that determination. So the next piece of the proposed improvement scoring involves the load posting. As shown in the list at the bottom right corner, the MBI database code structures based on how far below legal limits the bridge is posted. The assumption associated with this component of the scoring are that the full replacement of the structure would result in removal of any existing load limits, and that partial replacement or rehab may result in additional load capacity. I would say significant engineering is needed to determine the changes to the load that can be placed on a bridge based on the replacements made. So it would be up to the project sponsor to provide an estimate of the expected new load rating that would result from this type of work. That's typically available in the bridge design report from phase 1 engineering. Based on these assumptions, like the structural elements, scoring for full replacement would be calculated by subtracting the current posting code from the maximum of 5. And then scoring for partial replacement or rehab projects would be calculated by subtracting the current posting code from that sponsor estimated posting code that would result from the work being done. Staff did notice when digging into the NBI that there's a handful of structures that appear to have some questionable coding in this field in NBI. And, when we see those, we will, of course, refer back to the IDOT inventory, which has some more details as well as a narrative field about the operational rating and load posting. So, while it's certainly staff's preference to use data out of one data source for these projects, we do have other sources that we can rely on for backup. So finally, for structures that are identified as having insufficient lane widths, if the project would result in the insufficiency being addressed, and or if a design exception related to the lane width was documented for the project would receive 1 additional improvement point. Likewise, if any bridge-specific safety features are rated as not meeting currently acceptable standards, the project would correct that rating. The project would receive an additional half a point for each feature that is brought up to those standards. Again, if there was a documented design exception for those features, that half point would also be awarded due to that documented exception. So that kind of concludes the staff proposal on bridge projects. I want to stop and pause for questions and discussion before we move forward to the next one.
Okay.
All right, questions from the committee or comments from the committee?
Luis Benitez from CDOT. I have a question on item number 70. On 70, if you don't do a full replacement, but you do take out the posting, what is the rating? Because basically the repairs the rehab was done, no more posting required. Is that a 5 or?
Yes, that would be a 5, and we're relying on you as the sponsor, if it's not a full replacement, to provide that estimate of the change to the load posting.
Yeah, the goal is to always be about, remove the posting. I just want to make sure if you remove the posting, I just have a phrase, if you do rehab, you never will get a 5, even though you remove the posting. It's just clarification. Yeah. And the historic rating, MBIS done on the previous slides, I think it is. Mm-hmm. MBIS only has 5 items versus IDOT, the state has 8 items.
Correct.
And most of the bridges, all the basket are eligible, which classify, if you see in the IDOT, you say yes, and they're all eligible, but they're just not in the Congress list, and we only have a few of them. So I didn't know if 3 would be qualified for the 1.5 factor. I just the nomenclature here versus the state versus.
Right. Yeah. So looking at the federal ratings compared to the state ratings, I think it's a 5 or a 6 on the the state rating would be equivalent to a 3 here. And so if it was a 5 or a 6, it qualified, but wasn't yet listed, yes, it would receive the multiplier.
And the SI report, that basically we added basically yes or no. You know, if you see that rating is, don't give a number, it's just yes, significant, historic significant or not.
Yeah, so what would happen is if we saw a 3 or a 4 in the federal database in the NBI, we would then go consult the state database for that finer detail. And I suspect anything that's rated as a 3 in NBI is likely to wind up as being historic.
Yes. And the 1.5, sorry, too many questions. The 1.5 factor for historic and, you know, significant, that can be applied to item number 58, 59 on the superstructure, correct?
No, it would only be, or yes, sorry, yes, it would.
Okay.
Yeah, so if it's replacement or rehab, I got my slides out of order in my head. Yeah, if it was replace or rehab and it was a historic structure or a movable structure, then 1.5 would be the score from deck, super, and sub would be multiplied by 1.5. So all three.
No, and I think we discussed the other ones that were if we get an exception because the right of way, a lot of things like the approach guardrails and everything, we have a building next to the public, but we do ask for an exception on phase ones, you know, when we do the exemptions requirements. So that will be the exceptions that we need to provide, you know.
Yep. Yeah, and those exceptions
Other questions from the
typically documented in your meeting minutes. So with the state, so not a problem.
Other questions from the committee or comments? I don't see anything in the chat box from anybody in the audience with questions, but I do want to give an opportunity for those on the phone or anybody else to raise them if they have them. All right, well, I'll take this as a near perfect job by Kama. We'll move on to the next thing.
All right, so our next topic this morning is the truck route improvement projects. Currently, the existing conditions are measured by 5 equally weighted factors. The pavement condition, safety, reliability, and mobility, those first 4, we also use for our road reconstruction and expansion projects. And then truck volumes are also an equally weighted factor for the truck route improvement projects. Improvement is measured by the improvement to the mobility factor, as well as inclusion of certain systematic or incident-related strategies. So through comments and staff discussion, we're concerned that the scoring doesn't really consider geometric deficiencies like vertical clearance limitations or inadequate turning radii, things that inhibit truck movement. And we're also concerned that no consideration is given to the negative impacts of truck traffic on the surrounding area. So with that in mind, staff is proposing retaining the existing conditions factors, but adding to that a consideration of geometric deficiencies. And then when scoring improvement, staff proposes retaining mobility and systematic improvements, but making some tweaks to what those systematic improvements are. Also incorporating the geometric improvements and mitigation of negative impacts in the improvement score. So to rebalance the existing congestion score, staff proposes that we place a little less weight on pavement condition and safety in order to give geometry an appropriate weight relative to reliability, mobility, and truck volume. Geometric deficiencies are proposed to be scored based on the presence of weight-restricted bridges or vertical clearance restrictions within the project limits. So either, yes or no, there are or aren't a weight-restricted bridge or a vertical issue. And then also the percentage of the project length that has insufficient lane widths, or the percentage of intersections within the project that have insufficient turn radii, or queue storage for the design vehicle. Insufficiency will be based on phase one engineering, or for projects that are requesting their phase one engineering, can be based on a planning level study, or kind of clear photo evidence of these deficiencies. I think we've all seen those corners where there's tire tracks over the curb and over the grass from trucks struggling to make the turns. For the improvement score, staff is proposing 4 equally weighted factors: improvement to the mobility, reduction in, as the street sweeper goes by my house here, sorry for that background noise, improvement to mobility, reduction in geometric deficiencies, inclusion of a list of systematic improvements, and mitigation of the negative impacts. There would be no change to the way mobility improvement is scored. For the geometric deficiencies, points would be based on the removal of those weight-restricted bridges or vertical clearance restrictions due to the project, as well as the amount of reduction to the percentage of the project with the lane widths, turn radius, or queue length deficiencies. So for the list of systematic improvements that would qualify for points, this list is those improvements that, when implemented, can have a positive impact on the movement of trucks within a corridor. So just like in the first call for projects, as well as how we score CMAT projects, points from these improvements would be summed up to a maximum of 5 points for inclusion of anything on this list. Finally, recognizing that significant truck traffic can bring noise, pollution, and additional traffic congestion to an area, staff proposes awarding points for strategies that help to mitigate these negative impacts. Just like the systematic improvements, these points could be summed up to a maximum of 5 points. The first strategy here applies to projects that make improvements to a corridor with the intent of attracting traffic away from an existing corridor. So the 143rd Street project in Plainfield that was funded in our first call for project cycle is a good example of this type of strategy, where the improvements are being made on an adjacent corridor to shift that truck traffic. The next 2 strategies apply to directly reducing pollution or noise impacts, and the final 2 are more planning or regulatory strategies to manage freight movement. So that sums up the proposed changes to the truck route improvement project scoring. Again, I'm going to pause for questions and discussion here before we move on.
All right, questions or comments from the committee?
Yeah. This is Jeff Schreiber. Thanks, Kemma. It also looks good. I don't know if you could go back to the slide just before.
Of course.
On the mitigation strategies, so say like the first one says EG, so will it just be up to the project sponsor to document how it's, how the project would encourage trucks to go away from sensitive land use, so that those are just an example? I'm thinking sort of any residential community or any pedestrian oriented business district or something like that, regardless of whether it's a downtown area or a low income community would probably also be sensitive,
Yeah, I think that the key here is about how the project reroutes that truck traffic. So,
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. We'll put a narrative in the application workbook to capture that.
Okay. Looks good.
All right, so I have a chat question here from Michael Horsting. So any consideration or comments to where truck traffic overlaps with transit corridors? And we find walkability and access to transit services impacted by truck traffic. I mean, you could think of that possibly as being overlapping to some extent with sensitive land uses. If you're talking about, I mean, this only matters where people are accessing transit, like the stations or stops. which may have an intersection with sensitive land uses. So I think we might be picking it up that way, but I mean, it might be worth just taking a harder look at that.
Yeah, that would be my reaction. Would be we would add that to the list of example sensitive land uses there and pick it up that way.
Any other feedback on the truck route improvements from the committee? Reactions from anybody else in the audience or on the phone? Okay, this is not your only opportunity to give us feedback. We are expecting over the next couple of weeks that we'll continue to get stuff in from those who are interested in this and who will be impacted by the scoring. So why don't we move on from this to our next topic?
All right, so shifting gears a little bit now from our project categories to our planning factors. Starting first with the freight planning factor. Currently that factor was applied to road expansions, reconstructions, bridge projects, and safety projects, and that awards points based only on the truck percentage for the project corridor. So this methodology really doesn't consider the project's role in regional goods movement, nor does it consider the planning and policy recommendations of On to 2050 related to freight. And we also received a comment regarding this factor suggesting consideration of negative points for the negative impacts of increasing heavy vehicles. As we just talked about for the truck route project, rather than negative points for those projects, staff proposed points for mitigation as opposed to negative points suggested by this comment. So for the freight planning factor, staff is proposing scoring that in a similar way to complete streets and green infrastructure, with a portion of the points based on the project's location on a regional freight network, and the remainder based on policies or procedures suggested by On to 2050. Those policies and procedures are things like online truck permitting, policies that are specifically intended to improve delivery management, such as permitting off-hours deliveries, active management of loading zones, incentives for quieter or less polluting trucks, as well as completion of truck routing studies or comprehensive review of truck restrictions within the sponsor's municipality. Projects identified in a local, county, or regional freight mobility plan would also receive a policy point as proposed here. Each of these potential strategies would be worth 1 point up to a maximum of 2 points for the policies. So that's the bulk of the changes there, is just shifting that to policy and away from both policy and away from just the truck percentage. So I'll pause for questions again as I lose my train of thought.
Thoughts from the committee?
This is Jeff. I think these are good refinements. I think they're all pointing in the right direction, addressing these issues. It's a little, some of these it's a little bit tough to know how it's going to kind of play out until we actually try to implement it. But I think it'll be better than it had been.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Is there anybody else on the committee or in the audience who has thoughts about any of this? Again, not your only opportunity to provide feedback on these, but hearing nothing right now, let's go on to the next item.
All right, you dragged that out just long enough for the street sweeper to go by again, so that should be it. So our last topic today is the weighting of all of the planning factors. Just as a reminder, the intent of the planning factors is to set projects up for success with supportive local policies and to account for project benefits that aren't really captured in the transportation impact analysis. So currently the planning factor scoring matrix looks like this. And I kind of expanded it from what we're used to seeing so that you can see the policy and elements portions of that scoring. All projects can receive 10 points for inclusive growth, either 5 or 10 points for complete streets, and then the other factors, the green infrastructure, freight, and transit supportive density are applied to select project categories only. So as it exists, 25 points, up to 25 points can be awarded for planning factors. So comments related to the planning factors included applying more factors to certain project types, questions regarding the scoring of inclusive growth, which we talked about not at your last meeting, but the June meeting, a suggestion for more emphasis for complete streets elements, which was proposed at your July meeting, and then consideration of the negative impacts of freight, which we just discussed a few minutes ago. So based on these comments and the availability of 10 points to add to our scoring scheme from the removal of inclusion in plans as a readiness criteria, staff is proposing increasing the total weight of the planning factors from 25% of the score to 30% of the score, with those extra 5 points being added to the inclusive growth factor, as well as incorporating the changes suggested earlier for complete streets and freight, and applying the factors discussed in June for the new bike ped barrier elimination project. Also, with the inclusion of bike ped access to transit stations as part of transit station projects, staff is proposing removing the complete streets planning factor from transit station projects and replacing it with the green infrastructure planning factor. So in matrix form, that looks like this. Inclusive growth is bumped up to 15 for all project types. And then the previously discussed changes to complete streets, which gives more weight to the inclusion of elements than policies. The things we just talked about with freight are also incorporated. And then transit supportive density remains unchanged, and green infrastructure has been added to transit stations instead of complete streets. So this makes the total possible points now 30 instead of 25.
Hey, Cameron, I'm sorry here. We have somebody who is not on mute who really should be. Okay, thank you.
This was the last slide in this grouping, so next one is just questions. So bumping it back to you.
Okay, all right. So this is a little. These changes involve some bigger questions than some of what we've been talking about so far, and there, in some ways, there's a lot to it. So I'm curious what people on the committee think about this. If there's any further clarification that we need to make about the proposed changes or comments that you have about the substance here, we'll open it up to the committee.
Rick, I apologize. Remind me what the density parking number means on those.
Yeah, so
transit support.
Yeah, the density in parking is about having zoning land use densities around the station area that support are transit supportive, and then mixed use, and the parking is for having parking price. I think it was parking pricing. I'm sorry, I apologize. I don't have it right in front of me. Comprehensive plan policies or zoning policies within the jurisdiction.
Gotcha. So it's zoning in place, not necessarily actual.
Correct.
Built environment. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it's being able to support transit supportive densities in the areas around the station.
Yeah, the thought there was to, and we use basically the same system in the CMAQ program, but it's meant to encourage, those with land use authority to use it to support transit. All right. Kama, why don't we back up and just kind of walk through your sort of verbal listing of what the changes were.
This one?
So we started at 25%. In the first round, we had 25% for all the planning factors. We're bumping that up a little bit, and we're able to do that because we took if you remember, took inclusion in plans out of the scoring, because almost everything is in a plan, and so it wasn't really providing any kind of meaningful way to choose between projects. And so and that was worth 10 points. Half of that, essentially, we're proposing go to inclusive growth, because if you remember from our last presentation or last meeting, that inclusive growth scoring had some success in showing projects that really were benefiting disadvantaged communities. And so we want to sort of build on that success by bumping up that scoring. And then we've also heard some feedback from others that Complete Streets maybe was a little too focused on the policy component. I think the policy component matters, so we've just bumped that up a little bit and changed the weighting within that. And then there's a couple of other things here. So I just want to make sure that everybody, has the questions that has the facts, before we really talk about changes to the policy and what it means. So if there are any questions about any of this, please do raise them, and that includes the audience as well at this point. Okay, well, this is not your only opportunity to provide feedback on this, and we do expect all this stuff to be finalized later on in the fall, and so you'll have a chance to call us or to email, and we'll document that and bring it back to the committee for consideration. So if there are no other questions, let's move on to the shared funds status update. This actually, there's actually nothing to report here. We haven't received any more interim updates, so this is just a standing item on our agenda. We'll actually bring you more information when we have it. So I think there's a little more to say on the local program, and so I'll move on to agenda item number 6 with Mary.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So as of Tuesday, all local councils' public comment periods have closed. Final council approvals are scheduled throughout August and September. TIP amendments incorporating the new programs will be processed in early October for consideration by the MPO Policy Committee and CMAP Board at their joint meeting on October 14th. And that's our local program update.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Does anybody have any questions for Mary? All right. Well, at this point, I'll just ask if there's any other business for the good of the committee. Okay, hearing none, move on to public comment. This is an opportunity for comments from members of the audience. We didn't get any comments prior to the meeting. If you do want to give public comment, please let us know using the chat box, and just wait for staff to announce you before speaking. And I'll just give a couple of seconds for our slower typers. If anybody who's just on the phone would like to give public comment, please go ahead and unmute your phone and state your name, and I'll just give you a couple seconds to do that. Okay, hearing none, let's talk about the next meeting. That will be happening Thursday, September 3rd at 9:30. Meeting will be held virtually. What we're going to be talking about at this next meeting will be first off, wrapping up discussion of the items that we've been talking about in the past couple of meetings. So moving from this was our proposal to this is definitely how we should do it. And we are also scheduled to talk about safety project scoring, weighting of all the scoring criteria, including that final 5 points that comes from taking out inclusion in plans, discuss financial commitment scoring, and then some of the weightier topics like partial funding during program development, council bonus points. So we are planning to talk about those things at the September meeting. So if there is not any further business, because we have to take a roll call vote to vote, and it's actually not necessary to take a vote to adjourn, I'm going to suggest that we just treat this meeting as adjourned at this point. So thank you all for your time, and we will see you in September.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See you in September.
Everybody.